Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. Later, we'll be joined by Kentucky Agriculture Commissioner Ryan Quarles. He'll talk about some concerns in Kentucky's experimental hemp program and his efforts to address hunger in the Commonwealth. Commissioner Ryan Quarles in just a few minutes. But first, the head of the Kentucky Center for School Safety is here. The terrible school shooting at Marshall County High School this week has thrust Kentucky into the national spotlight. The questions continue about why a 15-year-old would allegedly enter his own school and fire away with a handgun, killing 2 students and injuring 18 others. The broader questions are, how do we prevent such horrible things from happening, and did training for an active shooter situation keep things from being even worse? John Akers is a former principal at Lexington's Dunbar High School and now heads up the Kentucky Center for School Safety. It's based at Eastern Kentucky University but has a statewide mission. Mr. Akers, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
We have already, of course, had, and this we learned, several school shootings in America already in 2018.
Right.
And what were your initial thoughts when you learned that the first deadly one of this year is in Kentucky?
Well, it saddened me a great deal. As a former high school principal, that goes deeper with me. That's as simple as that. And my hearts go out to all those folks down there. Of course, the families, and then, of course, the staff, and then the community down there. So it just saddened me. I just couldn't believe it was happening here, but it has.
What do you do at the center when something like this happens?
Well, I'd like to say we've done this before, which we haven't. This is our first time going through this thing. And so what we're doing right now, it's a coordinated effort with the governor's office, with the Department of Education, and our center. And they're doing different things, working with the folks down at Marshall, as we are as well. I can't get into a lot of specifics for obvious reasons on this thing, but we have a coordinated effort trying to get as many people down there to help them as necessary.
Schools drill for this kind of thing. They train for this kind of thing. I know you can't specifically talk about the training that they did at that particular high school, but there are state rules on how you prepare
Sure.
for an active shooter situation and other challenges that might come onto school campuses.
5 years ago, after the Sandy Hook tragedy we had, the General Assembly passed Senate Bill 8 at that time, and that basically made certain that every school has an emergency operating plan, that it's practiced, that plan is reviewed annually along with their first responders, and then again reviewed with their teachers at the beginning of the school year. And some of the components of that require all 4 emergency response drills to be conducted during the first 30 days of school. That would be your lockdown, that would be your fire, earthquake, and then severe weather. And then the law says that they're to review those again and do them again at the turn of the semester. So right currently now in January and February, schools are doing their second round of these. Now, of course, fire gets it once a month, but the other 3 get them twice a year like that. And so that's where we are with this right now. And so the drills are being practiced around our state.
So when you say practice, it means that not only do they lay the plan out, but they actually, the students and the teachers and the staff do take part in
Right.
an actual walkthrough of what might happen.
Right. In a school, and I'm sure you want to zero in on lockdowns, what typically happens in most lockdown situations is that well, first of all, classroom doors are supposed to be locked when they're teaching anyhow, so they don't have to go into the hallway, reset the door locked, and come back out. So we eliminate that step by having the doors already locked. Perimeter doors of the school are supposed to be locked, and you're supposed to be having your front door monitored in one form or fashion. But when you go to lockdown, if there's an active shooter situation, the door to the classroom's locked, lights usually go off, and they move the children away from any doors or windows and stuff like that where somebody could see you from the outside, so to speak. And then in some cases we ask them to go ahead and barricade the door just in case an active shooter should breach the door and get in. But we haven't had any incidents like that around our country so far, is that once the door is locked, the shooter has not broken into the door. But you know, we don't want to rest on our laurels and that, so we want to get, I guess, an additional thing in there by barricading the door.
Do the state rules require that first responders be involved in this process and this drill as well?
They're not required, but it's recommended. Because you have such a variety of different law enforcement agencies across the country, or excuse me, across our state. You've got some police departments that only have 2 people there, and they're on 12-hour shifts, so you can't get them in something like this. But any time that they can get in contact with police, fire, EMT people to review their plans, and then if they can be there during the drill, be there during the drill and make suggestions, because after every drill there's usually some kind of hiccup that happens that you need to tighten up something a little bit better. So doing the drills gives you an opportunity to see how strong your response is, and let's look for things that we can do better.
And unfortunately, when there's been a horrible situation like this, there is opportunity to look at,
Yes.
at what happened and look back. Now there are quickly proposals in the legislature for armed guards in all schools. In some places, recommendations of arming teachers. What are your thoughts on what it takes to keep school kids safe?
Well, I can speak all hour on this, but let me just go back to what you said immediately. Our stand at the center is that we don't believe that anybody should be armed in a school unless you're a law enforcement officer. They're trained extensively on how to deal with crisis situations like that, and just having somebody who has concealed carry permit or someone who's had 15 to 20 hours of training in this thing does not qualify for an expert to come into a school in a situation where you might have a commons area where shooting's going on like that. Research that I've seen over the years is that police officers, when they're in a crisis situation like that, barely hit 30% of their targets, intended targets during those times. So if we have a staff member that's trained to be a teacher, that should be a teacher, not a police officer out there trying to wield a gun around, I've got a problem with that. And so I want, and I hope that our legislators march very slowly to this and hear all the options that are out there long before that. So that's one issue. Now, when you go back to your question about how can we make schools safer and things like this, continue on with what we have. Have good plans, practice the plans, and make sure that, and this is the key component, and I'm a lifelong educator, 48 years in the business, the relationship that a teacher has with a kid is paramount. If kids have confidence in their teachers, which many do, then information will flow better. Most of these shootings around our country, somebody knew something ahead of time, so we're preaching see or hear something, say something. Talk to your mom and dad, and have mom and dad call the school, call law enforcement. We need to keep communication open as much as we can across the country. That's what everybody's saying is the most effective deterrent for active shooter issues, and I guess drug issues and suicide issues and things like this. If you get the information to the responsible adults, it gives us a chance to prevent something rather than try to mitigate something.
Social media has changed everything.
Oh, yes.
And the chatter so often that leads up to these events begins there.
Yes.
Do parents have a greater responsibility in that area to try to monitor that and try to intervene?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked that question, Bill. Statistically, we have the kids 15% of a calendar year. 85% of the year, somebody else has got them, usually the parents. And you're so right about the social media with smartphones and iPads and communication devices for social media. Parents don't always know what sites their kids are on. They don't know who's texting, what they're saying, and things like this. Even though the parents own the devices and pay for the bills monthly and stuff like that, rarely, my research shows that parents are monitoring these things. I advocate, I don't care how old the kids are in your school, in your house, those devices need to be charged in the parents' bedroom at night. And the parents need to be getting in there and looking and see who their kids are texting. What do they have to hide if they're being, well, don't see here. Well, I grew up, I didn't have civil rights in my house when I grew up. I was under my mom and dad's roof, and they needed to know what I was involved with, who were my friends and what's going on. I need to have parents take that bold step to get those devices and start seeing what they can do to see if there's something that shouldn't be there, both as a parent, and I want to know who my kids are with, or number two, there's something bad's happening there, we should know that. And then I ask the parents to please call school officials and let us try to deal with this thing. And we'll get law enforcement involved. And it's better to get these things out early than it gives us a chance to see if it's a legitimate threat or not.
As you know, we so often hear after the fact, if we had only known.
Yes.
And students, fellow students will say, and are saying in the wake of this, if we had known that the person needed help, needed somebody to talk to.
Right.
Is there a way to intervene earlier?
Sure, if we know ahead of time. And I speak solely from the school standpoint, because sometimes I think we're hit with a mantle that we're supposed to be mind readers. Yeah. And of course, now if I have a kid in class on a regular basis, I can look for changes in his behavior and demeanor and things like that. But if the parents are seeing things at home where the kid's not actively engaged with the parents, that the kid's sullen, going to his room by himself, staying on social media, not letting the parents know what he's doing and things like this. These are trouble signs. Sue Klebold from Dylan Klebold from the Columbine situation came out in her book and with Frontline saying that she encouraged parents to get into their kids' room, snoop around, see what's going down. She had that same thing. If I only knew what Dylan was dealing with, I might have been able to get some help and hopefully averted that tragedy that happened over in Colorado.
Knowing where we are, and you know the state very well, you know the financial restrictions that we have at this point. You note 48 years in education, so you know how
look
schools,
like it too, probably.
you know how schools operate. Is it a question sometimes of resources, though? Of you know, we had a story this week where one of the local law enforcement agencies was able to have 3 resource officers in a school district that had 11 schools or so. They can't be everywhere with the current situation without an extra commitment.
We need revenue to pay for these things. We can't keep cutting programs and try to do more in this area, you know, like protecting our schools with law enforcement officers. It's just a very difficult thing to do. So that's one component of this. Another component of school safety does not have a price tag to it. It goes back to doing what I guess I would say implementing the plans that you have as far as your emergency management plans, practicing these plans, tweaking the plans, and I go back to that theme again, trying to see if we can connect with all of our kids, you know, as teachers. And I would submit to you, Bill, that we probably can connect with 85 to 90% of the kids. But there's usually that 10% that kind of are on the peripheral, and we need to reach out to more of those kids to find out what's eating on them and maybe provide some intervention services long before anything bad starts happening here. So I think in the schools we can reach out to those kids more often than we're doing right now.
John Akers, thanks for coming by, giving us a few minutes of a very tight week, I know, for you with all this going on. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill.
Hope you will stay here on Kentucky Newsmakers. We are coming back with Kentucky Agriculture Commissioner Ryan Quarles. Some interesting issues in Kentucky, and that's ahead right here. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers on WKYT, and now a chance to catch up with Kentucky Agriculture Commissioner Ryan Quarles. The Ag Department is a large independent branch of state government with wide ranges of responsibilities, from farm policy to carnival ride and zip line inspections to checking your gas pump to be sure that you actually get the fuel you paid for. The commissioner has started some new initiatives, including one to combat hunger in Kentucky. He's championed Kentucky's experimental hemp program as well, and is trying to untangle the federal rules that are at play. Quarles is himself a curious Kentuckian, a farmer who is also Harvard educated with 3 undergrad degrees and 2 graduate degrees, including a UK law degree, and now he's finishing up on his doctorate as well. So welcome. It's good to see you.
Glad to be back.
A boot-wearing intellectual here. Good to have you with us, Mr. Commissioner. Let's talk for a moment about, as we were earlier in this program visiting with John Akers of the Center for School Safety regarding the terrible tragedy at Marshall County this week. I know you have many members of the ag community involved in that rural county. What are your thoughts at this time?
Well, I just want to say a lot of praise should go towards the first responders, the community. And I think we need to make sure that we take a moment and pause and talk about things that sometimes we take for granted in life. You know, Marshall County is a strong agricultural community. We actually have a lot of Department of Agriculture employees based out of Marshall County. And so when I heard the news earlier this week, it was heart-wrenching. And my thoughts and prayers go out to the victims and the families and the community of Marshall County.
A difficult time. Let's talk about the tough ag policy issues. You've been a strong proponent of industrial hemp. The U.S. Justice Department has decided to change the Obama-era policy of looking the other way when states legalize marijuana. Hemp is not marijuana, but does it leave any questions about Kentucky's hemp program?
Well, legally, the industrial hemp test project is underneath the 2014 Farm Bill. There is an express provision, Section 7606, that allows for the research program. That's what Kentucky has done. We've done it in a responsible way. We have worked with law enforcement, and we've made a lot of progress here in Kentucky, and Kentucky continues to have the reputation as the leader in industrial hemp. However, there is some confusion out there. When I talk to investors who are looking towards coming to Kentucky, they want to make sure that there's clarification, not just at the state level, but also from Washington, D.C., that if they're going to invest in a hemp company, that the barriers that other companies and innovative practices may have do not exist anymore. And so we're working with them. And we expect 2018 to be the biggest industrial hemp year yet.
I know you are planning to go to Washington to once again try to seek some clarity, because there are some questions as to whether or not you can process hemp candy or some various hemp products, right?
Unfortunately, there is some confusion and muddy water about the legality of some of the derived and processed products from industrial hemp. For instance, the DEA, FDA, and USDA all released a statement of principles about 18 months ago that really did not make it clear whether or not products derived from industrial hemp are legal or not. In my opinion, is that they are. And when we researched this plant from root to tip, everything you make from it is legal and part of the research program. So we're going to actually be in D.C. next week, and we're seeking clarification. And it's unfortunate that some spokespeople from these organizations, I think, are just saying things are absolutely wrong.
Why are you so encouraged that 2018 will be a good year for hemp?
Well, we just finished our application process, and we have about 240 plus farmers growing it, the most we've ever had. We have 57 processors who have brick and mortar locations in Kentucky. That means they have boots on the ground. They're invested here. And the amount of processors in our state is up 20% in just 1 year. And that's why I'm so encouraged, is that there's no lack of enthusiasm. People are starting to take industrial hemp and try to make it into intermediate and final products. We even had a processor last year send hemp fiber to Tesla and say, hey, can you use this in your cars? And we look at Kentucky being the third largest automobile producing state in the nation, with 400 parts manufacturers here. I think it'd be really cool that one day Kentucky farmers can actually help grow car parts for an industry that already coincides right here in Kentucky.
And maybe autonomous cars by then, right? We'll see. Commissioner, you know, there is this push for legalizing, there is one push for legalizing recreational marijuana in Kentucky. Supporters say that the state could tax it and control it. There is a push for medical marijuana, which some say has perhaps a greater chance of passage. How do you feel about that?
At the Department of Agriculture, we're focused on industrial hemp. This is the opportunity for us to bring a crop back to life that once thrived here in Kentucky. Henry Clay, perhaps one of the most famous senators and farmers from right here in Lexington, was one of the largest hemp producers. My family grew industrial hemp because the U.S. Navy asked them to during World War II. So the Department of Ag, we're focused just on industrial hemp and the promises that it could have. And one other thought is that there appears to be some medicinal benefits from industrial hemp that a lot of people perhaps advocating for medical marijuana may not be aware of. A lot of the CBD oils and other extracts from the floral part of the plant could actually be grown here for some of the purposes they may be advocating for.
Maybe you're saying that some of the benefits may already be present in hemp products?
Absolutely. And some of our companies are focusing just on that. Now, there's a lot of clinical research that needs to be done. We need to make sure that we do this in a responsible manner. But a lot of our hemp program participants want to focus on hemp because they think that some of the benefits that the medical marijuana community are advocating for, they think they can grow and process themselves already.
Kentucky faces a bleak budget outlook, as you know. The governor's proposing eliminating funding for 70 programs. There are many cuts to be absorbed by even including some of the local school transportations, the university, and so forth. The national metrics for the economy seem to be good. You have been in the legislature. Yep. How does Kentucky deal with that issue?
As a former legislator, it is so important to realize how bleak and dire the budget situation is in Kentucky. We have a massive pension crisis facing our state that has to be addressed. And until you correct pensions or work on them, getting the budget in place is always going to be reactionary. So at the Department of Ag, we are doing our part to proactively implement these cuts because I know that my friends down at the Capitol have tough decisions to make. And so we've already cut our budget 5 times in less than 2 years. And some of our employees have come up with creative ways to save taxpayer money. We have a lot of equipment at the Department of Ag. We inspect a lot of things. And one of our inspection trailers inspects propane. and it's very expensive. And we had a trailer that had been sitting outside, to my knowledge, for the better part of a decade, just rotting away. And instead of buying a new one, we had 2 employees decide to get the grinder out, get a roll up their sleeves, and they fixed it, and they saved the taxpayers $52,000 just by fixing something old and making it come back to life.
And those are things that you can control within your particular department, but this budget axe is swinging pretty widely, and it is hitting the ag community in some other ways. Animal diagnostics faces a cut, regulatory services, including soil sampling, some other things, it appears to be some concern to farmers.
That's right, and it's important for people to realize that this is just the first draft of the budget. So we're already working with members of the legislature, both in the House and Senate, to prioritize the needs and wants of Kentucky agriculture and trying to restore some of the funding for our regulatory services at UK, as well as our animal diagnostics labs, which, by the way, also double as biosecurity protocols in the event of some sort of unfortunate attack in Kentucky. And so we're working with our legislature, working with the governor's office. It's a good first draft, but we're ready to implement our 6.25% cut at Department of Ag.
If Kentucky ever does get around to some comprehensive tax reform, a lot of farm exemptions are in the tax code. Where would that put farmers?
Well, it's important to realize that we want to make sure that we do not unintentionally shoot ourselves in the foot. Our surrounding states have tax structures that take sales tax off of farm inputs. And so we would make sure that our tax policy is consistent compared to our neighbors, because otherwise equipment dealers would leave the state. And so it's important that we have a tax structure that allows food to be tax exempt, especially for those less fortunate, but also make sure that we have a fair playing field for our farm community.
With Ryan Quarles, he is Kentucky's Agriculture Commissioner. He's also started a program to help feed the hungry in Kentucky, and we're going to be coming back with that on Kentucky Newsmakers in a moment. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers from WKYT, continuing our visit with Kentucky Agriculture Commissioner Ryan Quarles. We have a major hunger problem in Kentucky. By some accounts, it's getting worse, even in a strong economy, and you have been trying to address that.
That's right. And as the Commissioner of Agriculture, I get to represent an industry that is really good at raising crops and raising livestock in our state. We're just so efficient and proficient at it. So I was appalled when I found out that 1 in 6 Kentuckians and 1 in 5 Kentucky school children are considered food insecure. So we decided to do something about it from the farm level up. The Kentucky Hunger Initiative has been working for about 18 months, and we've had some solid wins by bringing people together, keeping politics out of food. And I'll just give you a couple examples. We found out that there was a lack of cold storage at our food pantries across Kentucky. So we had a bank, Farm Credit Mid-America, donate 156 chest freezers to be distributed across Kentucky. We found out that our state law, the food donation law, had some confusion in it. It was causing a chilling effect, and some grocery stores that would love to donate food were a little bit hesitant to do it because they're afraid of getting sued. So last year we fixed the law. Now Kentucky has the strongest food donation law in the nation. And in fact, when we removed this barrier to generosity, we think 2 other states are going to copy our language verbatim this calendar year. So we're trying to make sure we have practical solutions.
There is a venison giveaway that has happened for years that people may not be familiar with.
So not only do we work with the farms to food banks and our food bank organization, but also Hunters for the Hungry. We have a lot of deer in Kentucky. And if there's anything that farmers, hunters, and automobile insurance companies can agree upon, is that we need less deer out in our state. And so we actually help support a program that donates 60 to 70,000 pounds of venison each year to those less fortunate. And so our hunters are able to take another buck or doe, donate that venison, and it goes to those less fortunate in Kentucky.
You've identified some new markets for Kentucky products. One of those is that we're sending horses to China at this point, that people may not be familiar with that.
Well, after about 18 months worth of work, I'm proud to announce we have reopened live horse trading with the People's Republic of China. At the request of Ambassador Branstad, I went to Beijing back in November, and we actually signed a trade protocol. And this was led by the Kentucky Department of Agriculture as well as the USDA. And within 1 month of this trade protocol becoming official, we have already sent 30 horses, Kentucky Proud horses, to China. And they're not just thoroughbreds for racing, but it's also saddlebreds and quarter horses. And this year, in 2018, we expect us to have a multi-million-dollar impact for not just the horse community, but also those farmers who bale the hay, and process the feed.
Under Kentucky Proud and other initiatives, you're also promoting the beef products from Kentucky, and that is a larger industry than many may realize.
Kentucky has more beef cattle than any other state east of the Mississippi. About 38,000 of our farms have beef cattle on them. I'm proud to announce that next month we're going to unveil a really unique 100% Kentucky Proud product with Kroger grocery store. And I think when Kentuckians are given a chance at the grocery store to choose between ground beef from an unknown origin versus one that is 100% Kentucky Proud, and they know that it was bred, fed, and processed here, they're going to choose local, and they may even pay a premium for it.
Kentucky's bourbon business has climbed to new heights in recent years. Do you think there's still a blue sky for bourbon?
Absolutely. They're in a bourbon boom right now. And one thing we're doing in the Department of Ag is making sure that as the industry grows, that they're making sure they look towards Kentucky farmers first. And I'm proud to announce that of the 15 to 20 million bushels of corn that are liquefied in the bourbon each year, that the amount of Kentucky corn going into Kentucky bourbon is up 65% in the past 2 years. And so as that industry grows, we want to make sure that market opportunities grow for Kentucky farmers as well.
You've told us before you're a candidate for re-election in 2019. It looks like there's a good possibility it's going to get on the ballot to potentially extend that term to 5 years. Do you welcome that?
I think it would be a great cost savings for Kentucky taxpayers. When I travel a lot, people sometimes say, oh, it's election year again. But I think it would be good for us to go on a 4-year term that aligns with federal elections as well. I think the latest cost was that it would save taxpayers about $5 million. In these tight budgetary times, we need to look for that.
Commissioner Ryan Quarles, Kentucky Ag Department, thanks for coming. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. And we thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. We'll see you bright and early on WKYT this morning this week, and we hope you make it a good week ahead.